How many of you are parents? Yeah, me too. Having a kid's changed everything, didn't it? Physically, emotionally, logistically, your sense of priorities, your sense of identity and being in the world. For most people, becoming a parent changes everything. And for a lot of people, there are a lot of changes spiritually as well. My mother always said that she never believed in God until she had children. And I have some friends who are startled to discover that holding a sleeping baby feels as much like worship as saying the traditional liturgy once did. Parents have a unique lens and a unique way of engaging with the world, and they can teach us a lot about what spirituality and spiritual practice are and can be. And at the same time, Judaism has a tremendous amount to offer those who are in the trenches of the exhausting, crazy-making, and so profound work of caring for small children. So I'm going to talk right now about how parenting is and can be a spiritual practice. And I'm going to offer 3 examples of what I think that might look like on the ground. 1, wonder. Children are masters at wonder. It can be hard sometimes to walk down the street with either of my kids because it's like, look, Mommy, I have found a stick. It's a magical stick. I can bash it against the tree. I can ram it in the sidewalk. It's a laser. It's a magic wand. There's a truck. Mommy, did you see the truck? Right? It gets hard to keep them on track because they're so overwhelmed by the magic and the mystery of the everyday. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel describes this as radical amazement. Right, the sense of awe and wonder that suffuses the world. And it is, he says, the root of spirituality. And I think a lot of times when we think about radical amazement, we tend to picture moments, out in nature and the beauty of being in the forest or the mountaintop or the sunset. But radical amazement can also be the taste of ice cream in our mouths. It can be the sweet beauty of the little flowers by the side of the road. It can be the sensuousness of the feeling of warm, soapy water on our hands as we do dishes. Radical amazement has the potential to illuminate the most mundane moments of our lives. And parents, sure, sometimes have these moments of radical amazement when they look at their kids and suddenly realize that these little beings made of light and love have like a working pancreas and nerve endings, and somehow by some strange miracle have come to exist and sit next to you at the kitchen table, right? And you suddenly look over and you get it and you say, wow. But the real master teachers of radical amazement are, of course, kids. And we can let our children move us, and we can plug into that moment when that baby registers shock and delight the first time she manages to drink from a straw. Right? And we can have that moment when our child has found the magical stick, and we can engage in that moment in delight with him or her. Right? We can find that joy and get on the radical amazement train along with him. And we can remember that it takes probably about the same amount of time to have some radical amazement with your kid as it does to have the fight about how we have to drop the stick and move on and keep going. Right? You get to choose what experience you want to have. And when you choose radical amazement, it makes you, I think, not only a better parent, but more engaged with the world and more able to experience it with a sort of a radiant joy. Judaism isn't just about saying the right words at the right time. It's also about engaging the world with a unique sensibility. And that sensibility is available to us always, all the time. And those of us with children are able to use them as our teachers and our guides. So that's 1. 2, sometimes Judaism is about saying things, right? When you think about prayer, what do you imagine? Right? There's the guy, he's got the gear, he's having this moment of solitude and profound contemplation. But what if prayer looked like this? A few years ago, when my older son was about 1.5 years, my husband went off on a business trip. And so Yonatan, of course, immediately began sort of projectile vomiting everywhere. It was terrible. We lived in a third floor walk-up. The laundry was in the basement. We were up all night, every night. And a few days into this, I had him in the bath, and he looked about like that kid, right? A little bit pathetic, really fussy. He didn't feel well. And I was exhausted and sort of hit my limit, and I just wanted to go into that cone of silence where nobody needed anything from me. And I found myself saying, "Help me." And suddenly, in that moment, my experience was transformed. I remembered that I was the adult, and that as problems go, this wasn't the biggest problem. And that, most of all, that as I understand the world, I'm connected to something greater than me, and that this moment might have been difficult, but it wasn't mine to bear in isolation. The book of Samuel teaches us that prayer can be about speaking on one's heart. It's about giving language to the anger and the loneliness and the desperation and the gratitude and the joy and the humility, right? It's about speaking what is on your heart and offering it up as a gift to the transcendent beyond. And when we think about prayer like this, we suddenly realize that there's room for it in all of the hubbub and the chaos of life with small children. That there is room for it even as we're trying to get everybody out of the door in the morning. And there's room for it even when there's like a level 5 tantrum happening at your feet in the grocery store. Right? There is space for it. And we realize that our prayers can be our lullabies. And our lullabies can be our prayers, and that same rhythmic repetition and that same message, right? I love you, undergirds them both. Prayer is an offering of our heart up to the transcendent beyond. And it's not something that happens in spite of children. It's something that can happen with and through them, if we are brave enough to expand our understandings of what religious expression is and can be. So that's 2. Number 3 is that even the biggest questions in Judaism can be changed when we look through a lens of parenting. Most people, if you ask them to picture God, will, consciously or unconsciously, think of this guy. Like it or not, this is the metaphor in our culture. But what if our metaphor for God looked more like this? Picture a woman who's pregnant. She and the fetus are in some ways separate, and in some ways they're one being. Right? They eat as one. They breathe as one. And it's not necessarily clear where the mother ends and the fetus begins. This is, in many ways, the way the mystics of the Jewish tradition and elsewhere have talked about God. We are all, the mystics would tell us, part of one great interconnected being. We are all interlinked, and this connection binds us and sustains us and nourishes us in ways that we may not possibly ever fully comprehend. And even if we are separate, right? Cognitive science tells us that newborns don't know where they end and their caregivers begin. That even in separateness, there is a communion that's possible. And even when that baby's a little bit older and off on her own journey, right? We as parents have this longing to be with our children, right? We want to connect with them. We want to be in union with them. We devour babies' toes because we want to consume them. This longing is the longing of great spiritual poetry throughout the ages. And this longing of humans for the divine is usually embodied in the metaphor of 2 lovers who are seeking each other. But I wonder if parents and children might offer an even more potent and powerful metaphor of a more unselfish, visceral love and this deep, deep longing. Right? And obviously, we do have the metaphor of parenting in our tradition, right? Avinu, right? Our father. But I think a lot of times when we think about Avinu, we think about that God that gets mad at you if you don't do your homework. And we don't remember this desperate desire of a parent to just watch the parents' children grow and flourish and be safe and be their holiest and most whole selves, right? This is the metaphor that can perhaps enliven our reading of traditional texts and liturgy. Maimonides says that the way to know God is to love God's creation. And so when we go deep into the love that we have for our children and for all of the other people in our lives, when we go deep into that love, we can find there a doorway to the infinite. And we only need to be brave enough to open it, right? Our love is the pathway to the divine. We can think about parenting as this thing that distracts us from real spirituality, right? From Torah study, from prayer, from ritual. Or we can think about it as a spiritual practice in its own right that makes us more compassionate, more aware of the sacred, more present in our own lives, and more present in the lives of those we love, right? And when we think about parenting as a spiritual practice, we realize that it can illuminate the most mundane moments in our lives, that it can illuminate our understandings of religious expression, and it can absolutely transform our ideas about and experience of God. We only need to be willing to choose it.